All right, and so we're live. With my show, I like an organic feel, and like we talked about on the phone a little bit, I like to get to know my guests and kind of what your mission is and what you're about, and learn about who you are as a person together. And I think that gives the listeners a more authentic feel rather than me having a list of predetermined questions that I sent you the night before. Then it starts to feel like an interview, right? And so, yeah, I got connected to you guys by someone that I just met like a day before I got connected with you, and he's from the Special Forces community, and he's doing things in regards to Afghan refugees, trying to help them out. But he said that you have a very interesting mission yourself, and that you would be a good person to get on the show and shine a spotlight on what it is that you're doing. So welcome to the show, Lyla and Ashley.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Greg.
So I think that the best way to start this out is just give you the platform, give a little bit about your background, who you are, where you came from, and then we just organically go into what your mission is and what you're doing and just have fun with the show.
Great. So I'm Lyla, and I am an Afghan American. I came to the U.S. in 1982 as a refugee of the Soviet War and ended up in Fresno, California for a little bit. And my parents were like, why did we leave Afghanistan? And so we ended up moving to Northern Virginia, where there were just a lot more Afghans and just a larger immigrant and refugee population. In a lot of ways, I think that was helpful because we had other people that looked like us, that reminded us of ourselves. But the more that I think about it, it actually worked against us in the long term. And the reason I say that is because we never really integrated into American society. Mm-hmm. We just ended up hanging out with a lot of other Afghans, speaking the same language that we had back in Afghanistan. I mean, my mom never learned how to speak English. My dad ended up pumping gas, for years. He just never really got past the trauma of what happened to them, having to leave Afghanistan, leaving their family behind. And so as I see the current generation of Afghans coming in, I can't help but think I don't want them to have the same experience that I had. Thankfully, I had an older brother that went into the U.S. Navy, and you start to feel real American when you join the military. So it was that experience that really helped break us out of that very isolated community that we were living in. He ended up saving me from an arranged marriage when I was 12. And so I followed in his footsteps, joined the Navy, and you can imagine pretty quickly found myself deployed to Afghanistan as a Navy officer. And it was really through that I ended up in the special operations community.
Okay.
And that's where I met people like Aaron, who connected us. So long story short, for me, a large part of what my mission is right now through this organization that Ashley and I are running is to really help make sure that Afghans have the best experience that they can have as newly arrived Afghan refugees, but very quickly, hopefully, they become a part of the American society and be able to live out their American dream just like I have.
Yeah, one of the first things you said is that your family questioned why did they leave Afghanistan?
Absolutely.
So that tells me then when they got to California, they just were devoid of joy, like they didn't know anybody. It was just, did they expect to come to America and have kind of different expectations, I guess, than what they found?
I think a lot of people from around the world have very different expectations. They watch movies. America is seen as this place where everybody's rich and life is really, it's Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
It's the Hollywood version of the United States. Everybody's really rich and powerful and has money and everything's just really easy. And that's not the case, right? It's really hard to come to a new country when you don't know anyone, when you don't speak the language. And for them, they fled persecution by the Soviets, right? So as I mentioned, they were obviously really traumatized by that experience. And I think they were hoping they would come to this new country that was promised to be the land of opportunity. Like if you came here and you were willing to work, like you could make something of yourself. But it's harder than all of that, right? It's not coming to America. It's not Eddie Murphy just showing up, right? With Arsenio Hall and everything being great. So it was difficult for them. And again, I think that's why they left Fresno and sought to be around other Afghans, just to have someone that was like them that they could connect to.
Okay. And how old were you when you made that journey over?
I was only 3 years old, so I don't have any memories of it. My brother was 10, though, so he has very vivid memories.
Wow. You said that was 82?
82.
What is there anything that your parents have like stories or tales that they've told you about that journey that like sticks with you? Things that like really kind of emphasize the importance of getting away from that kind of stuff and a new beginning. And
Yeah, absolutely. So my father was enlisted in the army back then, and because he spoke out against the Soviet occupation, again wanting to live free,
yeah,
right, live in a free society, he was imprisoned for a time, and so us leaving Afghanistan, it really was in fear, right? He was being hunted down by Soviets, just like our Afghan partners are being hunted down by the Taliban right now, and my mom, obviously, for her, just being ripped away from her family and not even really having a chance to truly say goodbye. I think that that's just a residue that's left on you, that you don't really get to overcome very easily. So in terms of the actual voyage over, this is a little bit funny, but the one thing that my family just kept talking about over and over again was how adorable I looked on the back of a donkey. As like a little 3-year-old going through the Hindu Kush mountains, and then eventually ending up in a refugee camp in Peshawar, Pakistan, which they described as like one of the most horrifying and horrible experiences of their entire life, is being in this refugee camp. So no good memories really, Greg, except for, the kids being on the back of a donkey, which I'm sure is funny for anybody to see. But other than that, a really difficult, really traumatic experience.
So even back then, once you're inside of a refugee camp, then you apply to different countries for asylum in the United States, take so many applications, or what was that process like?
That's right. And so in all honesty, because I was so young and my father died when I was 12, I mean, we didn't have a lot of really lengthy conversations about it, but I just remember, similar to what you're saying, is just this desire to get out of the country as quickly as possible, because you knew you're being hunted. You knew that your family could be killed. And thankfully, my dad had one friend that he had known years ago who had ended up going to the U.S., to California. So he reached out to him, and that person helped with the paperwork and actually getting us the legal status that we needed to come into the country. But that took 6 months.
Yeah.
Took 6 months of just trying and hoping and praying that there was a way to get all of us to safety.
And I've heard that before. I know, like, when I was deployed to Iraq one time, a family that was helping us, they lived with us, and the mom cooked and the kids did some, like, just chores around the compound and whatnot. And they told us that it was reaching a point, because they were working with the Americans, that they were targeted. And in order to apply for asylum, you needed someone to carry their documents into the U.S. Embassy, but they can't go into the U.S. Embassy. And so it's kind of, it reminded me when you said your father knew someone in California, like, for a long time, if you didn't have a connection somewhere or someone able to help you, there's no way out.
That's right.
And so I actually carried her documents into the U.S. Embassy, and she got asylum, and her daughters live in Chicago now. So it was a pretty cool story.
That's got to be an amazing feeling.
Yeah.
For you.
What part of Afghanistan did they live in?
So my dad's side is from Kapisa province, from a little area called Kohistany, which is where my last name comes from. It's not too far from Bagram Air Base. And then my mom's side of the family is from Kabul itself. Got
it. Okay. Yeah, I did two tours to Afghanistan, and I lived on Bagram Airfield on one of them, and then up in Asadabad and Barry Kaut. So
beautiful area, very rough terrain.
I tell people all the time, if Afghanistan ever were to become a permissive environment, I'm going hiking in Barry Kaut with my family.
That's right.
It's beautiful. And the cool thing about Afghanistan, like I always tell people when I'm talking about my experience overseas, Afghanistan, those people are some of the most humble, giving people that I've ever met in my life. When I was in Barry Kaut, we used to have villagers like getting arguments with each other about who got to provide us dinner tonight, because they were so grateful that we had overthrown the Taliban. And I did 9 months over there, and I never fired my rifle one time. And it was, I was with the 2nd Ranger Battalion expecting to like just go to war. And some of my Ranger buddies did see a lot of violence, but it was hit and miss. But the local population were some of the most like caring, giving people that I've ever been around. And so then when I deployed to Iraq, it was like 180 degrees the opposite. Like I thought like, oh, this is how the Middle East treats Americans. And nothing was further from the truth, because I went to Ramadi, which is in the Sunni Triangle, But So yeah, you grew up here then. You said you dodged an arranged marriage when you were 12.
Yeah, so my father definitely did not want to live under Soviet rule,
Mm-hmm.
but I would still not classify him as like a liberal progressive person. So culturally speaking, he still thought it was just very normal and natural for me to get married at a younger age. And so when I turned 12, my brother had already enlisted in the Navy. He was stationed at Balboa Hospital in San Diego. And my dad at that point was working for the United Nations, and he was getting ready to go back to Afghanistan to help rebuild the education system. And he didn't think it was appropriate to just leave me with my mom while he went on that trip. And so he called my brother and said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to go back to Afghanistan for the next year. I'm taking your sister with me." And my brother basically was like, the F you are, right? So he gets on a plane and he comes back and he physically stops my dad from taking me. And I mean, thank God for that, because my father did go on that trip and he was murdered.
Oh
And it's
man.
very likely that I would have been in the house with him
Mm-hmm.
at the time, or obviously married off to a guy who was 51. So either way, my fate would have been really, really, really bad.
That's crazy.
It is to think about it and to just think about how fate works. And I have so much love for the military, because I don't know of any other institution that would have made a 19-year-old feel like he had the power to intervene on his sister's behalf, right? Like, how amazing of a story that this 19-year-old kid goes to his commander and says, "Hey, I just got a phone call from my dad and I'm really worried about my sister and I don't want her to be married off." And that his commander said, "Hey, we will help pay for your ticket to go home. Go home, get your sister, bring her back." I just don't know any other institution that gives a 19-year-old that much power, that much confidence to think I can do something to change my sister's fate. So,
And then the fact that your brother had the resolve to be able to confront his own father,
I know.
that's pretty special.
I think so too.
So your brother's probably still your hero to this day, huh?
I mean, he's all right.
He doesn't get hero status. Roger that.
No, he's amazing. I love him a lot.
Was your father still being targeted from way back when, or was it just a completely different set of circumstances?
It was a different set of circumstances. Interestingly, it was some ethnic friction that ended up. Afghanistan does have sort of I think this will resonate with many people that have watched Star Trek, but it's a little bit of like a Klingon culture, like revenge can come back around generations afterwards type thing. And so it's just something in his past that caught up to him.
Yeah. That is one thing I noticed when I was over there, is like, even though the local population treated us with tons of respect and dignity, the conflicts that they would have within themselves was surprising. And, when I was in Barry Cout, there was like Dokalam and Nare and all these little villages that were in fairly close proximity, but there was this conflict in between them. And we would get intel reports out of one village that there was like a high value target in a specific house. So we would hit that house, and then come to find out they're pitting the U.S. troops against each other's villages just out of like wanting to cause conflict within your specific village. And it was like we were being used as a tool to create violence amongst the different tribes. It was kind of bizarre.
There is a long history of ethnic conflict, of tribalism in the country, and that dates back hundreds upon hundreds of years, which is really unfortunate. But a lot of that comes from scarcity of resources. Frankly, people are fighting over just basic things like water and land, right? Because it is an incredibly poor agrarian society, and when you have people who are wondering where their next meal is going to come from, the people that are closest to you sometimes seem like the competition.
For sure.
Because there just isn't enough to go around.
Yeah. No, I talk about that a lot on the show, is that I think Americans are so out of touch with just the struggles that half of the world is enduring as we speak. Something as simple as food or water. And again, as soon as you start to fight with your neighbor over a resource, like that's kind of a crazy idea for Americans to wrap their mind around. But that's half the planet right now.
It is. And I know people have different viewpoints on, something like climate change or, some of the other sort of changes that are going on around the world. But at the end of the day, like, it is a reality that there are parts of the world in which people are starving, right? That's just a reality. That's objective. Like, there are people that don't have access to clean water. That's objective. And the reasons for those could be debated, but the reality doesn't change. And so, like, right now in Afghanistan, we know that children are dying because they don't have enough food. We know that winter is coming. We know that people are going to die from exposure. We're already seeing it in some parts of Afghanistan. And again, beliefs, like, set aside your beliefs, just look at the reality of the situation. It's not just Afghanistan, like you're saying, Greg. There are a lot of places in the world where we are so very fortunate to be American, when we look in comparison to how many other people around the world live.
When you say, and maybe this is a good segue to kind of go into what it is that you're doing and the organization that you're part of, but when you say the resources are slim and winter is coming, are a lot of people currently still displaced and a lot of people are still trying to get out and there's just not like a sufficient plan to know like where these people are going to go or how we're going to feed them, or what's the current climate over there? Ashley, want to take this one? Because I think we talked about it right before we started recording, is that you saw people clinging to the landing gear of aircrafts for 3 days, leaving the airport there, Kabul International Airport, and everybody was outraged. Everybody was tweeting about it. It was on Instagram. But here we are a month later, and it's not even in any of the streaming headlines anymore. It's like, okay, Afghanistan's done. We pulled out. 13 Marines died. That was sad. It was almost like they just pretended like, yeah, okay, brush this under the carpet and now we're not worried about it anymore. But you guys are intimately familiar with what's going on there, and it's still a huge problem.
Yeah, most people have left their home and are either on the run, and it's important to classify some people are known to the Taliban and other armed groups and are being hunted, and some people are they've had to flee because of security reasons in general. But either way, tens of thousands of people are not living in their normal home, in the village where they grew up and around the support system that they have. And so we know they're particularly vulnerable going into winter. They don't have those normal, support structures that they would be able to rely on. And so they're having to rely on these artificial forms of support, namely donations, to be able to send in just the basics of food, fuel, and winter clothing. And most of these people are on the run because they had an initial hope of evacuating in the first couple weeks. And so they left to be able to, attempt that, whether that was on a flight or trying to get overland into a neighboring country and cross a border. We saw borders open and close and open and close. And now we're in a position where so many people have upended their lives, but there is no clear legal way to get them out of the country for the majority of them. So most of them qualify in some way for a certain type of visa. There are a lot of them out there, but they're limited. Some visas you can't continue to process until you're outside of Afghanistan. So they have to imagine the complexity of not living in your home and not having access to the normal support resources you would, but you're applying for a visa and you're probably talking to Americans on a daily basis trying to navigate this process. They don't fully understand it, and they are trying to apply, then leave the country, try to get it processed, and then figure out a way to get into an official U.S. government or another government's pipeline for legal entry to that country. And that's when it really begins, right? Are
there countries that are making that journey more streamlined and a little simpler? Or is it is getting out, and then from there, wherever country you try and navigate to is that path at that point?
My observation is pretty anecdotal, but even the countries that are making it a little more streamlined, namely the UK, are taking in a much smaller number. Canada would also, I would say from my observation, fall into that bucket as well. They're admitting people, and it's a slightly more straightforward process, but they're only admitting those in professions that they want to have in the country. Whereas the United States overwhelmingly is trying to accept the largest number of people and those that are just vulnerable. So maybe they're not a physician or an attorney or have a highly desirable professional background, but they could be a really great American.
Or somebody in need.
Just in need. Just,
you know what I mean?
Right.
I've heard that critique on Canada is it's like, people are always down on the U.S. immigration policy. It's like, you can't get into Canada unless you're like a rock star,
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. Whereas a lot of the numbers coming in, it's because they're vulnerable.
Is there a way, do we know numbers or a rough estimate of how many people are still in Afghanistan that are in dire need of refugee status and leaving the country?
That's a great question. We can speak every, you see with a lot of these groups, and this is probably a good thing, right? There are a lot of veteran and volunteer inspired groups trying to help. And all of us kind of have a slice, a type of person or a group that we're trying to advocate for. And so our organization is advocating for Afghan special operators.
Okay.
And so if you count what we call the principal, the main person who served, and then plus their family, we're looking at easily 30,000 people.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot. So not everyone's going to get out.
For them to be we called them CTPT when I was in, or the ANA, like these guys are obviously going to have targets on their back.
They do.
As long as they remain in that country.
Absolutely. And many of them are known by their neighbors, by family members that they served in the Afghan military. I'm not sure what level of access the Taliban has in terms of biometrics and records, but it's very likely that they have been able to get those records because they've taken over the government.
Everything.
They control everything. They've taken over the government. And so it would be easy for the Taliban to be able to get access to that information and be able to target people. And that is what we are hearing from our partners on the ground, is that they are being actively targeted, that their family members have been visited by the Taliban, asking for that principal's whereabouts. And that's why so many people are displaced and living in safe houses and just praying that they can make it through winter. Because the fact that winter is coming, it's not only a humanitarian aid crisis inside of the country, but it is going to be extremely difficult to move across the country.
Yeah.
So you're not going to, you've been there.
I was going to say that January in Afghanistan is a different thing.
It is.
It's like a cold that gets in your bones.
It does. And it's a beautiful, beautiful country like we talked about. But it is, I used to say this when I was teaching courses on Afghanistan. The geography of Afghanistan is actively trying to kill you.
Yes.
Routinely.
Yeah, I like
if it's
that.
Not, if it's not sandstorms that are going to ground your helicopters, you don't have the ability to fly overhead assets. It's the mountains and you are like crippled with cold. And the altitude is no joke, right? And most of us don't live, unless you live in the Colorado Rockies, you have no idea how difficult it is to be in Afghanistan. And so we are very concerned about the inability to move, and you can't fly.
Yeah.
You can't fly unless you have planes that can be de-iced, right? And so who has that capability?
No, I remember flying in some of those storms in 47s. And there was one time when we got off the bird and formed like a defensive perimeter, and it felt like, the prop wash coming off of the helicopter. It was so strong that you could barely take a knee. It was knocking you over, right? And then the helicopter flew away and the wind didn't change at all.
That's right.
And I realized, that's not prop wash. It's just a blizzard out here.
That's right.
We're going to have fun tonight. What's sad though is that it's like, these people were committed to our mission for 20 years. I'm sure some of the people that you guys are referring to, how old are they? That probably as far back as they can remember, the U.S. was occupying Afghanistan, and that was part of life, right? And now they dedicated their life, or they served in a capacity that assisted us. And then when it's time to go, just bye guys, figure it out. And it's kind of becoming a trend for the United States,
Sadly. And you're right. For many of them, they speak, not everyone, but many of them, they speak really great English. Right? When you talk about them sharing our same values, I mean, I was talking to a captain who was part of the Katejas, which is like their sort of national mission unit. And he's at Fort McCoy right now. And he's got 2 sisters that are there with him. And he's talking about how proud he is of his 16-year-old sister because she's already an activist. I mean, you couldn't ask for like a better sort of example of like what America was able to help cultivate in Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
In terms of this amazing Afghan special operator who he's not trying to hold his sister back. He doesn't see women as like inferior, right? All he feels is pride in every member of his family for serving in some way. And so for someone like him, for a captain, he's young, right? Just like our captains are young. And so he was inspired to serve by us being there. And he's so happy to be in this country. And so when we think about the types of people that we've left behind, like I'm so happy that he's here, but how many more people like him are still left in Afghanistan?
Yeah.
And these guys are some of the most vetted as well, right? They have just by having a relationship with U.S. military and U.S. special operations in particular, they've been observed for years. So if there was something derogatory, right, it would have come out by now, you know?
Well, you always hear people talking about like the vetting process would be so tough. And I imagine, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when we were pulling out, there's probably a lot of people fleeing the country and many who had no relationship with the U.S. Would that be a correct assumption?
You are 100%
Just
right.
because
some people just got lucky.
The writing's on the wall. They know where this is going. And now it's their chance to try and get out.
That's right.
And I mean, I see people's concern because vetting those people does seem nearly impossible, right? But at the same time, like, I don't know. I feel like everybody's always super afraid that a terrorist is going to sneak through, you know? But have we seen that taking place over the years? I feel like the refugees that are escaping from these third world fucking war-torn shitholes, that they're not coming over here with the intention of doing the U.S. harm.
That's right.
They're grateful to get out of those countries.
Just like I was, just like my brother was, so much so that we joined the United States military.
How old were you when you joined the military?
I started off with a reserve officer training corps scholarship when I was 18. So I went to college. And then I was commissioned when I turned 21.
Okay.
And my brother joined when he was 17.
Nice. And then Ashley, you did stuff working with Syrian refugees as well, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Lyla and I met in Kabul. That was my first deployment in special operations. So I'd served a couple years before that in the Army as an intel officer.
Okay.
And then assessed into civil affairs. That was my first rotation, just a couple weeks actually after graduating our qualification course. And one of my earliest memories working with Lyla was I went to her kind of like hat in hand. I'm a clueless, captain here with this great moniker.
There's no such thing as a clueless captain.
Oh man, I'm clueless at like every rank, right?
I love that you admit that though, because it's like
that's the only way I was going to learn.
Yeah.
Here's this badass bitch that I'm working with, right? And she knows all of this stuff. And what am I going to do? Read more books on Afghanistan to learn how to work with people. And that is actually my job in special operations, to connect with people and empathize with them and then figure out how we can work together. So Lyla was huge with that. And after that, I ended up, my next rotation in the next couple of years were almost entirely focused on Syria.
Okay. Where were you living out of Erbil at that time, or were you actually?
No, I kind of wish I had gotten the opportunity to do that, but I spent most of my time in Turkey and Jordan. So we were doing a lot of the interagency cross-border work to support governance that was not affiliated with the Assad regime, and then just humanitarian aid, and then the outflow of refugees from Syria.
Got it. That's awesome. I had there was a unit guy who was working out of Erbil, but he was focused on helping refugees get out of Syria as well, and also out of northern Iraq, because he said that when ISIS just ravaged Iraq, that there was a lot of girls that were raped and there was a lot of babies that were born. And that culturally over there, those babies were considered like tainted or dirty or whatever. Right. And so he goes, there's literally refugee camps full of babies. And I said, bro, I mean, I have 3 daughters. What's one more? I said, if you can, however I can be part of this, I said, I'll adopt a child if you can make that happen. And what he wanted to do, because he had connections with Vice, and he goes, what we hope to do, he goes, since you've been all over Iraq, he goes, I think it'd be cool if you came back over and actually like saw the refugee camps firsthand. And we'd fly you into Erbil, and then we'd go from there. And then you would adopt a child, and then we could show that story. And he thinks that would resonate with a lot of Americans and start to get, because I mean, adoption wait lists, adopting children is hard right now. Meanwhile, we have children that are starving to death in refugee camps. So this doesn't make any sense, right? And so we were hoping to be able to kind of bridge that gap. And he presented it to State Department, and they weren't having any of it. They said, no way, not a chance.
I think about all of the unaccompanied minors who are separated from their families right now. I mean, we heard about thousands of them in places like Qatar being processed, and they're coming to the U.S., they're going to need homes. And this notion that, I've heard a couple of people in the Afghan American community say only other Afghans should adopt Afghan babies. And I'm just so diametrically opposed to that. I want those kids to be adopted by any family that will love them and take care of them.
How about you get adopted by someone that will raise you with love and kindness?
That's right. That's what matters most to me. And you're not the first person, Greg, to bring this up. I can't tell you the number of SF guys and SEALs who, whether it's them or their spouses, have contacted me and been like, how do I adopt an Afghan baby? Like, I am desperate to help. And to me, I mean, that's what it means to be an American.
Yeah.
Right? Is you see someone in need, especially a child. I mean, you have to be a special kind of a fucked up person not to care about kids.
Of course.
Right? So like to see a baby being passed over barbed wire by their mother, right? Because they're just so desperate not to have their child murdered by the Taliban.
I'm going to give away my child.
Yeah.
Because I believe this will be a better future for them.
That's right.
Like to try, I mean, I have 3 small children. Well, they're not all small anymore, but they're 6, 9, and 12, right? It's like to think about handing one of them over a fence and just, all right, have a good life. That's a reality that people are experiencing.
Like the desperation you must feel, right?
Yeah.
Like the desperation you must feel as a mother, as a father, to do that to your baby.
Well, let me ask you this. Are there avenues that are opening up for this, or is it still just bound down with red tape from State Department?
Specifically as it relates to adopting Afghan children, I haven't heard any very specific policy prior to the fall of the Kabul government. You could not adopt a child from Afghanistan unless you were Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
And so at this point, we're still waiting to see an official policy from the government, because there is the goal, the State Department has the goal, which I agree with, to try to reunify families that have been separated, right? So if there is a child who was separated from their parents and their parents are in a different country or awaiting arrival to the U.S., then obviously that child is being taken care of until they can connect.
Mm-hmm.
But for those children who they may never see their parents again and we have no idea where they are, then I hope that there is a streamlined process.
Well, and from what I understand, especially inside of Iraq, like when ISIS swept the country, a lot of their parents are dead.
That's right.
And like, there's no record of it. There's no way to connect. There's no way to confirm. Like, it is what it is. You have basically just a nameless person that you know nothing about, And one thing the guy said to me that was kind of dark, but he goes, I'm not saying this to make light of the situation. He goes, but like, there's so many kids here. He goes, if you think a 3-year-old girl is what would integrate with your family well, I get you a 3-year-old girl. He goes, or if you want a 1-year-old son, and he goes, I know that sounds weird to say out loud, but if you're willing to take a child home, I want to make sure that it's probably going to be the best fit for your family so everybody's successful, And it's like, man, to have so many people over there that are in desperate need, but we're bound down by red tape. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I also think, like, for me personally, having a special operations background as a younger man, like that was my entire 20s were dedicated to the wars. And I went in the military at 18, and then 9/11 happened while I was 20 years old in Ranger Regiment. But you look at the experiences that you had in combat and in war and deployments, and a lot of it is rooted in like violence and anger and all the negative emotions that affect humanity. And I think a lot of guys like us, now that we're in our 40s, we're reflecting on that stuff and thinking, what could I do to help balance that out? You know, like when you're 20, killing the bad guy was like the end all be all. But you know what, how much more like special it would feel to actually, instead of looking at violence-based solutions, how about I help someone and I help them grow into a successful human being. And for me, I remember I was like, you know, I might only be helping, I'm not saving the world. I'll be helping one person. But if more people are willing to help one person, that does save the world, you know? And it certainly saves that one person's world. What's that worth, you know? So yeah, I mean, as this continues to materialize, if you hear things about that, that'd be something that I would still be interested in doing, because I think more families need to be willing to help people like that. And like I said, I already have 3 kids. A fourth, I probably wouldn't even know the difference. You know?
I come from a family of 7, and my parents used to joke about that.
Uh-huh.
Like if you don't make it to the car, you know, after being in the grocery store, we won't notice you missing, right? Like Home Alone is real. It's good for Americans to know that there are unaccompanied minors that likely will not be reunified, or it just will be impossible to do so, that are already here in the United States. So unclear what that process might be in the future. Understandably, the government would be very careful about, you know, working through that. But I think in the next couple months, we're going to have a lot of clarity, much harder to adopt from Afghanistan under the current regime, right? The current government is the Taliban.
They're calling the shots now, right?
Right. So like that's going to be so much more difficult, but there are children here now. There was a woman, and I don't know her. She was passed off to me in one of the many signal groups in the first couple of days to just help her and her kids get through a gate. And her kids were both American citizens and she was not. And we ended up, one child was 12 and the other was 3, and she was advised for the 12-year-old to take the 3-year-old through the gate, and she left them. And she made that decision herself, obviously.
Yeah.
But it became clear she was not going to make it through. And so I think about people like that. And maybe it's a child that just needs a family, you know, until they can be reunified, but that could be years.
Yeah. So, I mean, are they just under like foster care or state care, the kids that are here now? Or who knows, I guess,
no,
right?
It's a great point. The safe havens that have been set up on the 8 military bases, I'm sure they've got a whole process for unaccompanied minors. I'm not super familiar with it. But yeah, I'm sure that there's a process, and I think we'll get more clarity over the next couple months on how that's, and we're happy to pass that off.
Yeah, please do.
I'm already hearing kind of conversations about this in the coalition with a lot of the veterans groups that are assisting. There's a lot of people that have interest and have the ability to support and just want to know how.
Yeah. No, it's just bizarre. Like, I think there are plenty of people willing to help, but you have all these like roadblocks in the way that make it difficult for people that are willing to put themselves out there and assist. It makes it almost impossible, you know? You mentioned something to me. You said, when we talked on the phone, you said, your project isn't really looking to like assist refugees out at this point, but more assist the people that are left behind, basically. Did I understand that correctly? Or
So our organization started off, of course, primarily focused on evacuation.
Mhm.
Right? Task Force Pineapple did. The 2 people that founded it, Scott Mann, who's a retired Green Beret, and then one of his really good friends, James Meek, who's a journalist. They started off really trying to get one person out, and then that snowballed and ended up with, I think, around 1,100 people total that were evacuated, it's not that we're not still concerned about our Afghan partners and helping to get them out. But what we're really focused on right now is that humanitarian aid piece, like getting them through winter.
Got it. Yeah.
Making sure that, because we just know movement is not going to be possible with winter coming up. So getting them through the winter, making sure that they're safe, helping to continue with advocacy at the congressional level. But we would be remiss not to focus on the Afghans that are here in the United States as well.
Yeah.
So we didn't help get people out of Afghanistan so that they could then languish in the United States, right? We want them to live well in the United States. These were people who, as we said, fought shoulder to shoulder next to us. We don't want them driving an Uber or a Lyft. Nothing wrong with driving an Uber or a Lyft. And I'm really glad that there are companies like Starbucks and Amazon and Uber and Lyft that are willing to hire Afghans.
And Black Rifle Coffee. Yeah,
very, very glad that all of those organizations exist. But I also want us to think about the skill set of the people that we've brought over, right? So especially if we're talking about our special operations veterans, that's like saying you were a Navy SEAL or you were a Green Beret for the last 15 years. Here's a job at Starbucks pouring coffee.
Yeah, not going to work.
Right. And so,
yeah.
And also, I say this with a great deal of respect to every single American, but you're a taxpayer, right? We invested in creating some phenomenal soldiers out in Afghanistan, and we should want to use their skill set as part of our national security.
Mm-hmm.
These are people that are extremely rugged, extremely resilient. They know a lot about the world, about that part of the world especially. They have great language skills.
They're great hustlers.
In the best way. And so why wouldn't we want to leverage those talents? So that's a big part of what we're focused on here, Greg, is how do we help our Afghan partners, these extremely vetted, extremely trusted veterans. We are here together on Veterans Day, the three of us as veterans. They're veterans too, Greg. They were just born in a different country.
Yep.
That's all it is. And just like we take care of our veterans here and we take care of military spouses and we take care of military children, let's take care of our Afghan veterans and their spouses and their children. Because we're American, they're Afghan. We're not all that different though, when it comes to our values.
Yeah, that's something that's that a lot of Americans feel kind of stuck on. And the older I get, the less I identify as an American. And the more I identify as just a human being, because it's an arbitrary line drawn in the dirt and you happen to be born on one side and I was born on the other. And a lot of people feel, it seems like they're kind of stuck on that notion. And we shouldn't be, it comes back like we shouldn't judge people on the color of their skin or their religion or what country they're from. We should judge them on their character, And like you said, those people have already shown their character.
That's right.
And that they're loyal people and that they've given everything. And what do you think the best option is to build that awareness and facilitate those people into the correct type of employment?
Yeah, it can start on such an individual level. Mm-hmm. So we think one of our great friends and one of the co-founders of Task Force Pineapple, Scott Mann, is releasing his movie today, Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret. We think that that's a really great way to just start, especially for someone who doesn't understand the veteran experience as it relates to Afghanistan. That's a great start.
And what's it called again?
Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret. So it's lastout.com, right?
Yeah, lastoutfilm.com.
Okay. And you can just go to that and look.
That's right.
And watch it for free.
You can watch
free
it
to
for
watch.
free.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
nice.
So it's that's a great way to start, just to kind of empathize with the experience, both the U.S. military veteran and the Afghan veteran, and understanding why we have this special bond. I think for the average American, that almost needs a little bit of storytelling put to it.
Yeah. Well, human beings are emotional creatures, right?
Yeah.
So if we can target that, and that's not like dirty play or nefarious, telling a real story should trigger emotion.
That's right.
I was actually just talking to a good friend of mine last night about how I still remember the first time I watched Braveheart when I was 14 years old. And that inspired me to want to become a warrior and join the military and become a ranger, because it's like you just feel something, right? So that kind of stuff matters. Movies matter.
They do.
It can actually inspire people and change people's trajectories. I'll put the link to that movie in the show notes.
Oh,
so
cool.
for anyone listening, you can just scroll down on Apple iTunes and click it, and it'll take you right there.
Oh, very cool. And then I would just say, again, this is so personal and individual, but it's the smallest act of kindness that I think we can show an Afghan. You're going to start seeing them in the grocery store and in the post office and just around town. And that smallest act of kindness that you show somebody can really inspire them to live their American dream. That's really what we have to show them. We can't explain that to anyone, I don't think. You know, it just kind of runs flat. We have to show them what that means. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts an American can give someone.
And one of the things that we're doing tonight, and some of our colleagues are doing in other parts of the country as well, places like Fort Bragg and places like New York and others, is we're hosting a dinner this evening. And we're bringing together newly arrived refugees, members of the Afghan American community that have already been here for several years, if not decades, American community members, city and county level officials, and then veterans. We're all going to sit down together. We're going to break some naan, right? Break some bread. We're going to have a meal together because, frankly, I just think that there are a lot of people, like you said, who want to help, but they don't know where to start.
Yeah.
And I think that veterans can act as a phenomenal bridge between Americans and Afghans because we've served alongside them.
Mm-hmm.
We know about their character. We can help even be a little bit of a cultural advisor, right? As Afghans are trying to integrate and Americans are trying to assist them with that integration. So I would ask the veteran community, especially, anything that you can do at your local community level to help Americans understand why we all care so much about Afghans will go a really long way. Because if we're being honest, there are a lot of parts of the government that most Americans don't trust. But they
pretty much all of it at this point.
All of it, but they trust veterans.
That's true. Yeah.
They trust veterans. And it is our time to lead in our communities when it comes to helping with the resettlement of Afghans.
So has Washington State specifically taken on a decent amount of refugees, or how is that divided up throughout the country, or does anyone even know?
I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but how it kind of works is after people arrive in these safe havens, they're eventually matched with around 200 plus cities where there are resettlement agencies that kind of, there's a system, of course, and they're matched. And sometimes their preferences are taken into, most of the time, if they know somebody in the area and they say, hey,
kind of like a wish list in the military.
Yeah, a little bit. But, you know, as a city fills up, they can't take anymore in certain areas. So of course, Northern Virginia is all but full. And that's a huge diaspora for Afghans. And so you're going to start to see some of these other cities, you're going to start to see more arriving over the next couple months. And it's mostly because they have somebody there that they're, you know, that's a part of their support network. And the resettlement agency is the one that kind of brings them in and handles that very initial setup. But they are completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And that's why organizations just like ours are standing up, and just some are focused on that immediate need, just moving somebody into an apartment and getting them some furniture and handling donations from the community. It's incredible to hear the stories across the country of this happening, but we're focused on kind of that next step.
Is it kind of the norm then for the community to figure out a way to support these people, or is it being done at like the federal government level as far as finding them resources and apartments and stuff like that?
I mean, what I've observed, which is not everywhere, of course, but it's the community. 100% over. The federal government can't possibly have that type of reach and the knowledge of a community. And there's an example from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where there's a family that volunteer with us, and they took in a 14-person family, the husband's former interpreter and his extended family.
Wow.
And are setting them up and they renting them a house and getting through all of that. And they get some support from the resettlement agencies that are federally funded.
Mm-hmm.
So they do, get some initial rent payments and, Social Security cards set up. They all had visas, all of that. But anything beyond that. She has this incredible story of, I don't even know how we found out about it. I think they were in like on a podcast like this or a radio show locally, and a local business owner for mattresses just showed up and said, brand new mattresses, how many do you need? 14, and just showed up with a truck one day and just, brought them into the house. It's an incredible story. And I think we're hearing ones like that all over America right now, just local communities stepping up.
That's cool.
So what we have heard from some of our volunteers here is that Kent, Washington, has a decent number of Afghan Americans who have already lived here as part of the diaspora, and there's an organization called the Afghan Health Initiative. The website is afghanhealth.org. They are a 501c3. They are committed to helping Afghan refugees. And so when you're looking for like a community hub, that's a place that you could go to, right? To volunteer, to ask, what do Afghans in the local area need? How can I help? How can I support? And what we've heard is there are about 1,000 Afghans so far that have come in to sort of the King County area, with Kent being at the hub of that. I'm not sure how many more Washington will receive, but as Ashley said, the process is, as an Afghan, you go into one of these 8 military processing safe havens. You are vetted once again, right? So there are Afghans that sit there on those bases for months until they are vetted and they're cleared.
Is Joint Base Lewis McChord one of those? Do we know?
It is not to my knowledge.
Okay.
No, it is not to my knowledge. And after you're released, that's when you are essentially taken in by one of the 9 federally funded resettlement agencies. So organizations like Catholic Charities or Lutheran Immigration Relief Society or the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. So there are these 9 groups that help you, as Ashley said, with that very initial resettlement. But that's about 90 days worth of assistance, Greg. 90 days. And then after that, you're very unlikely to hear from that organization again. And we want to be very clear. We feel so much empathy for the people that work at those 9 federally funded resettlement agencies, because they are overtaxed. No one ever expected to resettle this many people all at once.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And so it is going to be incumbent upon the community members to really help step up, be the awesome Americans that we all know you can be, and just realize that if you help those Afghans with that initial piece, it will go a really, really long way in just helping them feel like they can actually be a member of your community.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want people to think about, you said they get 90 days of somewhat of some assistance, and then you're on your own. Think about losing everything that you have right now, not having a job, not having a car, not having a house. And as an adult, and starting from square one with nothing and building yourself back up. Now, people can do it. It can be done. But how much easier is it if you have the support of people on your left and your right, you know?
That's right. And imagine doing all of that with children.
Yeah, in a foreign country. Yeah. Although you said that a lot of them do speak English just because of their work with the troops overseas. Okay.
Many of them do, but we should also keep in mind something that you said earlier, which is that there were some Afghans who they just wanted to get away from the Taliban as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Some of them did not have a connection to the United States. And so there are people here that don't speak English. And so they're going to need a bit of time, a little bit of extra time to actually get some language training. And this is where, again, I think the Afghan diaspora is so important, right? Because they can act as those mentors and
you
advocates.
keep using the word diaspora, and I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, so it's...
Ashley did too.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's my bad. That's not your bad.
So diasporas are communities of refugees or immigrants that have come over in the past. And so there are large diaspora groups of Afghans in places like Queens in New York, Northern Virginia, as I mentioned, my own upbringing, places like Fremont, California, which is in the Bay Area. And we have a small group, smaller group that is here in Kent, Washington. So I'm really proud of an organization like the Afghan Health Initiative, because it's Afghans wanting to help other Afghans.
Got it.
That makes me really proud to see, right? Is that we're not just saying this is something for the average American to have to contend with. What we're saying is we will be the hub, right? This organization is amazing. I've heard wonderful things about them. We're getting ready to meet the head of the organization, Naveed, later on tonight for dinner. I'm just so proud that the Afghan diaspora community is stepping up and saying, we are going to help take care of other Afghans, but we could use some help.
Yeah.
We could use some help from the rest of the community.
That's cool. You know, one thing that I always hear whenever I put out messages like this is some people are resistant because they have problems themselves, or there's American kids that are starving. You know, actually, when I talked about adopting a child, they're like, there's plenty of Americans that are having a problem. Why do you prioritize someone from another country? And it kind of goes back to what we already talked about, is like, over here, over there, they're just human beings, right? But what do you say to people that are reluctant, or that are afraid, or think that you guys are going to be putting dangerous people in their communities and stuff that is kind of just almost a media-based fear that's not really grounded in reality?
Yeah, I hear that, and we think often that there are a lot of programs and organizations already stood up serving those communities. It's definitely not perfect. Child welfare in the United States is a broken system, 100%. But there really aren't a lot of organizations helping Afghans resettle. I mean, there's a lot who have just stood up now, but that's a huge reason to support and volunteer with this effort. And we really go back. I've personally now seen how many layers of vetting it takes to get to the United States. Yes, even though a couple people did make it through in those very early days that didn't have a connection to, maybe someone else deserved to get here, they've still been vetted. And there are groups that did not make it through that process and are not in the United States and never will be. It is important to see that. And
so you're saying, I mean, that tells me that you've seen the vetting system work then.
Yeah.
It's not just a check the block thing. And they're actually going through people's histories and figuring out who's suitable and who's not.
We've even had people that we're personally recommending through the system, that Afghan special operators who worked with U.S. special operators and had something in their file from 12 years ago. I mean, like, I don't trust anyone who doesn't have a record, right? Myself included, right? I've erred as well in life, and he had something on his record, right? It was minor, and he continued to serve, and he spent a lot longer in Qatar going through that process. Required extra letters and affidavits, and the FBI reached out personally to members on our team in a good way to confirm what was in his file and confirm that it was actually not derogatory, and he is going to make it to the United States. He is here. He has arrived now. Yeah, that's right. Months delayed. He is one of the first to get out, at least, through our organization and in the early days. So I do like to remind people that this vetting is serious, and it's part of the reason that we actually have such a backlog in what are called lily pads overseas. These, official centers that have been set up specifically to vet people. They're spending weeks and months there. Even people with a fully approved visa spent a long time there. They had to do their interviews over again. Bureaucracy abounds. And then they're vetted again once they're here before they're released from those safe havens.
Okay.
And adding on to what Ashley said, when I think about like veterans programs, we've actually gotten some pushback from other veterans. Hey, there are veterans that are homeless. How can you ask us to support Afghans right now when there are veterans who are homeless?
Veterans want everything. You know what I mean? Here, I'll say it so you don't have to, but it's like there's 10 million veterans programs. You can go fishing. They'll take you skydiving. You can go hiking. Like, there's a million programs out there. Half of them are BS. Some of them are good. But for you to be a veteran and saying, poor me, you're just not looking into the resources, because that stuff is everywhere, including the VA. And is the VA a broken system to a certain extent? I think everybody can agree that there's work to do, but you can be taken care of. If you're saying poor me as a veteran, you're not motivated to be seeking the right things and making connections with the right people, Plus, that's also a mindset of scarcity as opposed to a mindset of abundance, because I'm not going to get enough of what I deserve, that person doesn't deserve it either. How about you figure out a way to make it work for you and then a way to work for them too, you know? And that's kind of a weird thing that people see is, or that people do is when they see other people having any type of success, they kind of want to poo poo on it, right? It's like, oh, these Afghan communities are receiving assistance. Well, what about me? Like that's just a backwards way of thinking, I think, you know? But the veterans entitlement can drive me nuts sometimes, you know?
I agree. And I also think that as people who put on a uniform and served, service doesn't stop. Like if you truly have service as part of your ethos, then when you see other people that are in need, you know, you step up.
Yeah.
Right. And that it doesn't matter who is in need. And again, to your point, I definitely echo it. There are a lot of programs for everything that veterans need.
Yeah.
Everything, whether it's an official program through the government or the 40,000 veteran serving nonprofits that have been created since post 9/11, not just for the veterans themselves, but also for their family members. I always go back to there's a phenomenal support system that's out there. If you take the time to apply to programs, you look for them and you want them, they're out there. Whereas this situation right now, Greg, it is a crisis.
Yeah.
It is an absolute crisis that no one expected, that no one was prepared for. And this is why I'm really hoping that the veteran community and the rest of America will step up.
I'm sure you still have connections throughout Afghanistan from your work and then obviously your story and your upbringing, but do Afghans feel resentment towards the United States right now for feeling like we left them behind? Is that because it would seem like after supporting our mission for 20 years and then we said, you know what, we've had enough, we're out of here, that would be a difficult pill to swallow.
I'm sure that there are some Afghans that have resentment towards the government, but I don't think that they resent Americans. I think they see that there's a distinction there. And frankly, many of them were disillusioned with their own government.
Yeah.
And they could separate, right? They could separate the fact that the government makes decisions that the people don't always want. I mean, we've all experienced that in both countries. And I think in this moment right now, what Americans can do is to help show that while our government may have made a decision that we didn't like, that veterans didn't support, that frontline civilians who spent years of their lives out there didn't support, that we are going to step up. And that won't take back anything that happened. But I think what it does is it shows the world that Americans will do the right thing, even if the government doesn't.
Yeah. And that's I feel like we're going to have to start doing that on lots of different fronts. You know what I mean? This is just one problem that's been created. But I think for a long time, people kind of relied on the government to be the end all be all. And I feel like you got to have the mindset that no one's coming to save you and that we need to be saving ourselves. I say that a lot on this show in regards to like your own financial wealth or your own physical health, all these different things. But this is kind of along those same lines, is like, we can't rely on anybody to come and save these people. We as a community and as a nation need to do it ourselves. And I mean, we did the same thing in Vietnam, but we created this problem, you know? And like maybe you, the individual listener, don't hold like actual responsibility, but us as a nation, we went over there, we did what we did. We are culpable for what we're dealing with right now. So to just turn our backs on it and say, whatever, that's not my problem. Well, it kind of is our problem, you know?
And Greg, for most Americans, they may not know the whole history of our involvement in Afghanistan. What I mean by that is many Americans think that we became involved because of the attacks that happened on 9/11. That's just not true. President Eisenhower went out to Afghanistan in December of 1959, and there's a reason for that. It's because the Cold War was going on, and we as a nation wanted Afghanistan as an ally against the Soviet Union. it's why I'm here, right?
Yeah.
Is because my father hated the Soviet Union as much as America hated the Soviet Union in the 1980s. That's why so many other Afghans came over. And the Afghans have fought alongside the Americans for decades now. I mean, they fought against the Soviets because we asked them to,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They fought against the Taliban because we asked them to. Now, did they do it also for their own freedom and liberty? Absolutely. But the point is we said, we have common enemies. Let's work together. And at this point, I do think that the American people should value the Afghan partners that we have helped to bring over, because again, they fought for our freedom too. They fought to keep us safe as well.
Yeah.
They fought against our enemies over there to keep those enemies from being able to attack us here.
Mm-hmm.
So for the last 20 years, we haven't had a 9/11 because of our partners.
Yeah. No, that's a powerful message that people need to realize. It's easy to forget when things just become comfortable and you fall back into your routine, you know? But no, that's a really good point. Do you have any feedback on what it's like now under Taliban control? I mean, I guess we can all kind of imagine what that's like, but what's kind of word coming out of there? Because I mean, I haven't been to Afghanistan since 2003. You know, I'm pretty far removed from it these days.
Yeah, some of the just daily experiences that we hear from families that we're helping. We have over 5,000 right now that are still in country that we're actively mentoring and supporting, and so we hear from them daily. Our case managers, our shepherds, if you will. Children aren't going to school. Definitely not girls, but little boys too. And so we have families asking for online resources, you know, in secret, if you can imagine an Anne Frank kind of situation where some of our most vulnerable allies are being hunted. And so they are in what is technically a safe house. So their identities are hidden, they're safeguarded, we're paying for that. And they're living silent, secret lives right now with potentially 5, 6, 7 children in an apartment, probably half the size of this room right now. We're in a small room right now for the listeners.
Yeah. There's no video on this episode.
Yeah.
This room is basically like a closet.
So that's it. But you know, food is scarce. People don't have, you know, they left without any belongings, so they don't have. That's why we talked about winter is coming, and even just having coats. We're doing a coat drive right now to get people the clothing that they need to literally survive the elements in the winter.
What are some, not to cut you off, but I mean, I think talking about doing the coat drive or raising money, like if people are listening and they're inspired to want to give or help, what are some direct ways? Like, do you have websites with donations or places people can mail blankets and coats to, or what's the first thing people can do to actually impact change?
Yeah, we think donating at this point, there's a variety of organizations, and we can send them, you know, links to you so you can drop in the chat.
Okay.
We found that donating in kind, meaning your coats here, actually won't work from a supply chain perspective. We actually did the cost estimate on that, and that is not going to happen.
No one wants your old nasty shit anyways. Give the cold Afghan kids a nice new Arc'teryx jacket.
There you go. There you go. Right. Some Patagonia or something.
Yeah.
It's very expensive to ship things from here.
Got it.
All the way out there.
So then you guys are collecting money and purchasing stuff a lot closer.
That's right. Either in Pakistan and moving overland, or directly in Afghanistan, and we're buying from businesses, from families in our network.
Got it.
So it's going to an Afghan, you know, textile maker who's pumping out coats right now as we speak. And
and everything's made in Pakistan, right?
A lot. Yeah.
A lot.
Okay. Yes. So I mean, that I say that like not pejoratively, but like, that's a good resource that's right there.
That's right.
Okay.
Right. And it's important too. That's just the life support, things that have changed dramatically. So children aren't playing outside. Girls definitely are not going outside. Women are not going outside. They have to have a male escort. They have to be fully covered. This is literally overnight, women who could walk around in jeans and t-shirts and, wearing makeup outside are now fully covered in a burqa, cannot be seen alone. And
So was it full on like Sharia law again then?
yeah.
Like,
Yes. It's
I remember
back to the 1990s.
I remember there were, Vice did a documentary on Raqqa, Syria, like right when ISIS
It was
took over.
excellent.
And it was
excellent.
like all of those same kind of things just implemented at the highest level.
Overnight.
And so that's the same thing that's happening there now, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Women could have taken a taxi in Kabul and gone to the market and just gotten froyo. There's a really great froyo place in Kabul. That's definitely closed.
That's so crazy to think about. Like this isn't a movie. This isn't a book. This is human beings' lives where on Monday they could walk down the street and get a cup of frozen yogurt and now they're hiding in an apartment and they can't show their face. Like that should bother people, Like that should inspire people to want to make a difference and be able to help.
Absolutely. I think about that movie that came out during the 1980s. It had Patrick Swayze, Red Dawn.
Red Dawn.
There you
Yeah.
go. It's Red Dawn, right? But
Is anyone screaming Wolverines?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. But yeah, in Red Dawn, what happened? Just overnight, right? The communists took over. And you had people fighting back. I mean, that's what we're seeing to some extent in Afghanistan. There are still pockets of resistance. Yes.
Is there any hope for them to be successful, or is it just based on the numbers game? Does it not seem feasible? Because the Taliban seems to, I mean, obviously we underestimated their strength. I shouldn't say we did. The federal government did. I think if you had any E5 from any special operations unit, they could have planned a better withdrawal than what we saw. But that's neither here nor there. But I mean, is that kind of what we're seeing then?
I think we'll continue to see a proxy war being fought in Afghanistan. There are pockets of resistance that will continue to fight. But when you look at where Afghanistan sits, Greg, it's in a really, really bad neighborhood, right? I mean, you got Russia to your north, you got Pakistan to your east, China, Iran, right?
Yeah.
These are not countries that are necessarily our friends, right?
Yeah.
And so if we're looking at how happy they must be to see us having left the way that we did, and we know that there are intelligence agencies from the other countries nearby that are actively supporting the Taliban right now.
Yeah, China being one of them.
Exactly. And so
it was so, I mean, I'm put my tinfoil hat on, but the way we pulled out of there was so fucked up that, and again, I don't say that like jokingly. I feel like any E5 from Ranger Regiment could be like, okay, well, any type of operation, the last element that you collapse is your security perimeter, right? So we pull out our security perimeter first, and then everything implodes, and then people are acting surprised. And it was done in such a poor manner that it makes you have to ask, like, did we do this on purpose? Did we want to see this implode? Like, is there some backdoor deal going on to cause like chaos and unrest? And I don't know what the answer is, but it just doesn't seem feasible that we decided to just, hey, let's close down Bagram Airfield.
It's what I think is also really important for Americans to keep in mind that there's still American citizens there.
Mm-hmm.
There are still legal permanent residents that are there. I mean, Foreign Policy magazine had an article that just came out that said there are estimates of 14,000 people who are Americans that are still trapped over there.
And are the reports correct that they're just going around and taking people's passports?
We are hearing that as well.
And a lot of people lost their documents in that rush in August, or in some cases, we have people that we are case managing right now who burned their documents because it affiliated them to the United States.
Got it. Just out of self-preservation.
That's right.
And now they can't get here because they don't have the document.
That's crazy. Did I just see you check your watch? Oh, okay. Because I know you guys have an event.
She's not wearing a watch.
Full.
Oh,
okay. Got it. But I mean, we're at 3:20. I know you guys wanted to get out of here at 3:30. And so I think we could probably talk for hours about this kind of stuff. And you guys have where are you guys at geographically? Are you local to here very often?
Not very often, but we do love coming here. So I've spent a lot of time at Joint Base Lewis McChord over my career.
And I went to school in Portland.
Okay. I'm sorry to hear that. Actually,
I have
take
fond
that
memories.
back. Portland and Seattle were some of my favorite cities in the world until the last couple of years when they've just become cesspools, but that's a whole other topic.
I just love the Pacific Northwest.
I do too.
I love the greenery here, but normally we reside in the DC area.
Got it. Okay. The other cesspool.
Also a cesspool.
Yeah.
You beat us to it. Yeah.
Well, what would you say to people then, I guess, as a way to close it out? And I know we've talked about it a little bit, but the best way to get involved, find out who you guys are, your organization, give them a website. I like to do the bookends of the shows with the material that people need. Because if they're listening on their drive home and then they get back and they're like, actually, I wanted to see what that website was, kind of close it out with that. The best way for people to get involved and where to find you guys and where to help.
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is taskforcepineapple.org. And again, we'll share that with you. And folks can just go and join our mailing list for now. We are getting ready to launch a newer revised website over the next couple of weeks where we'll be able to help people figure out different ways that they can support our mission, right? So whether it's donations, volunteerism, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd ask that you do that first and foremost. Check out lastoutfilm.com. You can also donate right now to theheroesjourney.org, which is a storytelling nonprofit. And like we talked about, that's incredibly important. And we'll also send you some other links like we discussed.
Awesome.
Local Washington-based, Seattle-based links that I think will be really helpful. But more than anything else, Greg, what I would ask the listeners to do is just open your hearts and your homes to the extent that you can. These Afghans they've been through a lot. They're here because they want to be here. They share a lot of values with us. Thanksgiving is coming right around the corner. We as Americans have a lot to be thankful for.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can you as an American include Afghans in what you're doing? You're going grocery shopping, maybe invite them to come with you. If you meet someone through a friend or a contact, your kids are going out to play, they're doing something fun. See if you can invite some Afghan kids to come along. I just remember how isolated I felt as a kid, how isolated my parents felt. And again, it's the smallest thing. You don't have to give money. You don't have to spend hours and hours and hours, but look to get involved at your community level. Reach out to Afghan diaspora organizations that are already here. Again, the Afghan Health Initiative is a great place to start. And they can connect you with Afghans at the local community that would benefit from your advice and your mentorship.
Awesome. All right. And Ashley, anything to close it out? Pressure's on you to wrap the show up with something legendary.
No pressure. No pressure. I really hope Americans can form a bond with Afghans the way the U.S. military has. I think it's something that vets can really, lead the charge on, be the tip of that spear. But I really hope that my fellow American citizens and neighbors can one day have a bond the way I have with the American or with the Afghan people.
Awesome. All right. Well, I appreciate your time, ladies. I really thank you guys I know you got a busy schedule and it's a turn and burn show, but good luck at your event tonight. Keep me posted and I'll keep sharing this stuff and try and help spread your message. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you so much, Greg.